Okay, let's see if we can't do this as God intended. Not true, God gave us the ability to figure out a microphone. That means we shouldn't have to always use our diaphragm. But here we are, batteries died, and we are left with what I've got. So, we got to start off in our discussion of king with the grammatical elephant in the room. And that is, God is not a dude. Now, I know when we hear the word king, we immediately think of a masculine image. That's part of the baggage of English. English has a wide variety of different terms, and when it wants to be gendered, it is very gendered. When it wants to be ungendered, it can be ungendered. It's a nice flexibility of English, but Hebrew, not so much. Hebrew will always have a gendered flavor to every noun, whether it matters or not. Like I say, the table, the window, the sun can have a gender in Hebrew. That doesn't mean we think of them in any particular masculine or feminine ways. And that goes for the concept of king as well. If we were to think of God as a queen, it shouldn't change our conception of God. It just so happens that in Hebrew, when you have to default for something, the general default, when the gender is unknown, is to go for the masculine. That doesn't mean masculine is better than feminine. It happens to be a simpler form in how the grammar is conjugated. That is the default. It doesn't mean that there is any relationship between the usage of the word king and anything that we would describe as being masculine. Neither biology, God forbid, since God is lacking in a physical form, nor in attitude, meaning we do not expect God to behave more manly than we would expect God to behave more womanly, because God is not manly nor womanly, because those terms don't apply. But we are trapped in language, and so we will use it. But now that I've got my little caveat here at the front, when I use the word king, please do not think I am trying to make any reference whatsoever to anything that is connected to gender as we know it. It is simply the term that was used as being helpful in the ancient world. And as we're going to see, it can still be helpful in the modern world, which is good, because apart from the name Adonai, or the title Elohim, meaning God, Melech, and its various forms about God in either verbs or adjectives or nouns for God's reign, is the most common descriptor for God. Bar none. Yes, we talk about God as God, meaning Adonai, the actual four-letter name. We talk about God as Elohim, meaning God itself. Third in line of how we refer to God is with some form of the word Melech. And we're going to see there's lots of different ways that this can be shaped. So we better figure out what this means. Because if we don't, then what are we doing when we say, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam? What do we mean by that? And why has that become such an essential element within our prayers? And why has the concept of God's kingship, God's sovereignty, dominion, reign, I'm going to be using these words more or less synonymously, although we'll make a little bit more distinction later on. Why are these words so common? And what are we doing with them when we actually say them? And I'm going to give you the spoiler alert now. We're not supposed to be thinking of God as being somebody in an ermine-trimmed coat sitting on a throne with a fancy crown. If that's what you think when we say Melech HaOlam, then you have whooshed right past what our ancestors wanted us to think when we think of Melech. They had a much more sophisticated concept of what it meant to be king, and a much more powerful spiritual message to give us than, you know those guys on a chair that give rules? God's even better than them. They got a lot more sophisticated than that. Okay, so first of all, let's just remind ourselves some of the places we see this term. I don't have the entirety of the list of where this crops up, because to do so would mean going through the entire Siddur, the entire prayer book. But look at the top of our first page titled King. Your kingship is the kingship of all the world, and your rule is with generation upon generation. The eternal reign, the eternal has reigned, the eternal will reign forever and ever. Anybody recognize the unique combination of these two quotes back to back? Where does this come in our service? Not in the Amidah. If I hum a few bars, it will help. Malchutecha malchut olamim umemshaltecha bechol dor v'dor. That's Psalm 145. Adonai, 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 Leolam Vahed. Great, you all know how to conjugate Hebrew now. Right? Adonai is king, Melech. Adonai was king, Malach. Adonai will remain king, Yimloch, for all time. English does not do it justice, because the idea of being able to say Melech, Malach, Yimloch is beautiful Hebrew conjugation, but if we said Adonai is king, Adonai has always kinged, Adonai will keep kinging, it doesn't work in English, because English is, what is it they say, 3 languages masquerading as one in a trench coat. English doesn't do that elegantly. Hebrew does. It's one of the perks of Hebrew. Learn it. All right, what about the next citation, which you might know? The Lord will reign forever, your God Zion for all generations. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. This is the Kedusha. Right, this is the literal capstone of the Kedusha at the end. Having acknowledged God's holiness and having acknowledged God's greatness, the Kedusha always rounds us off by reminding us of God being king for all time. Okay, now, just because you didn't recognize all of these, that's okay. I'm sure you were all caught up in the Hebrew, but remember the Hebrew is no substitute for comprehension. If you remember the Hebrew, but you don't remember what the Hebrew means, you need to stretch a little to try and get more of that comprehension in. It doesn't mean you have to become fluent in Hebrew, but if you're singing the Hebrew, at least try to glance to the English a couple times, refill that mental idea of what's going on there. Hopefully today's class will help with that. Okay, so God's kingship is really, really important. It sits at major markers of our service, and like I said, it is scattered throughout the rest of our liturgy and all the other references to God. And in fact, there is an underlying concept behind all of this, that a person should accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. To accept Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. Now, yoke, this is not the stuff that's in the middle of an egg. A yoke in this context is your basic farming apparatus. Right? We all know, thank you for the gesture over there, exactly. Right? We all know you got your big cow and you want your cow to pull the plow, because that's much better than you trying to pull the plow. Well, you can't just tie the plow to the cow's tail. The cow's not going to like that. You can't tie it to its legs. You got to tie it to something you put around the cow's shoulders so that when it pulls, it's not going to choke the cow, but all of the cow's energy from all of its force will be transferred back down those ropes into the plow. That device that goes around either the big neck collar or across its shoulders, it depends on which part of history and which part of the world, that is called a yoke. That is our yoke. In Hebrew we call it an ol. Ol. Now, Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, is a critical term within Jewish theology. That we are meant to receive, meant to accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Now, what does that mean? It means we are the cow. Right? We're a cow. And if you were a bad cow, when the farmer came and wanted to put the yoke on you, you would run and buck and kick and thrash, and you would not want the yoke to go on you. But what happens if you don't take the yoke? What happens to the work that needs to get done? It don't get done. Right? You have to have the yoke for the work to actually be accomplished. Your power, your strength, your might does nothing if it is not harnessed to be able to actually create a proper, productive action. And that's what the yoke does. And that is the concept that the rabbis accepted. That we are accepting the yoke of heaven, meaning we are accepting God's rules, because those rules allow us to transform our action, our life, into a meaningful course, into plowing the field, into making the world a good, better, blossoming, pick your metaphor, go down the agricultural or any other road you want to go, that we are transferring our power into something that is meaningful and tangible. That's what they believe is the goal of accepting the yoke of heaven. But they don't believe that this is a one and done kind of activity. This is something that has to be reinforced over and over and over again. How does that happen? Well, let's take a look at the Talmud. One who seeks to accept upon himself the complete yoke of the kingdom of heaven should relieve himself, that means go to the bathroom, wash his hands, netilat yadayim, don tefillin, recite Shema, and pray. That is acceptance of the complete kingdom of heaven. That's it. That's it. So I wake up in the morning, I do my business. Why? Any guesses? Why am I going to the bathroom before I'm accepting the yoke of heaven?
You're going to be distracted otherwise.
Because I'm going to be a little distracted otherwise, right? It's very physical. The rabbis were well aware of how our bodies could distract us. And if you wake up in the morning, well, most of us, the first thing we need to do is step into the restroom and take care of everything we weren't doing while sleeping. Now that pressure has been relieved, now we can move on to the next steps. Netilat yadayim, because it is a sign of purification. And then putting on tefillin, saying the Shema, and doing the Amidah. That's whenever the Talmud talks about prayer in an undifferentiated way, they are talking about the Amidah, about the cornerstone, the Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, that section of our service, which is done 3 times every day, 4 times on Shabbat. Okay, so why those last 3? What is tefillin, what is the Shema, and what is prayer actually accomplishing as far as getting us to the mental, spiritual state of accepting this yoke? Well, when we put on tefillin, we are quite literally strapping ourselves in. It is an incredibly powerful metaphor when taken within this. We are putting the harness on ourselves, people. Anybody here ever actually work with like horses, livestock? You ever put a saddle on anything in your life? Am I the only one who, okay, we got a few people who's actually put a saddle on something or who's put a harness on an animal or anything like that. Trust me, the tefillin can feel very much like you are harnessing something up. You are getting it ready. That cinching on the arms and putting it stuck, it is very close to that. The metaphor is not a big jump. Now, the tefillin also, of course, psychologically, are about adorning ourselves as servants of God. So we are dressing the part. We are actually wearing a reminder of our connection to God. So we're not just some random shlemiel. We are putting on the kingly gifts that God has given us as part of this process. And the physical form makes a difference in how our spiritual form will accept something. Saying the Shema, we're going to get to more in just a second. And then the Amidah, we're also going to come back to. But let's get on to our next text, also from the Talmud. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha said, why, in the mitzvah of recitation of Shema, did the portion of the Shema, the part that we are most familiar with, the actual Shema Yisrael, we got that line? And Ve'ahavtaha, the paragraph that comes after it. Well, you know there are 2 more paragraphs, right? Yes. Okay, so why did the order go in the order that it goes? Why is the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, here just called the Shema, why does that precede the section of V'haya im Shemoah, which is the paragraph afterwards, the big middle paragraph? Why are they in the order that they are in? And don't just tell me chronology from the Torah. Trust me, we take things from different parts of the liturgy and we rearrange them all the time. So it's not just that's the order they're in. Instead, so that one will first accept upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, that is to say, in the commentator's view, the awareness of God and God's unity, and only then accept upon himself the yoke of the mitzvah. All right, so here Brachot is trying to break this into its subcomponents for us by saying, look, we've got multiple pages here, or multiple paragraphs, they're each doing something a little different. What does the Shema actually say? 6 words.
God is one universe.
God is one, right? Adonai Echad. There's only one God, right? One God. Very good. What does the middle part of the Shema say? Because we always love to talk about the Echad at the end. What does the middle part say? The beginning is just listen up, right? Shema Yisrael, hear what I'm saying. And of course, in Hebrew, the word Shema doesn't only mean listen, it also means obey. Just like in English, the word hark. To hearken to something means to take it in as a course of action, not just hit your eardrums. But what do those 2 middle words mean? Adonai Eloheinu. God is our God. Now, it sounds really stupid in English, right? Because we often translate the word Adonai as God. But remember, Adonai, Yud-He-Vav-He, is God's personal name. Chas v'chalila, you should think there's any comparison, but it's like saying Zeus or Thor or Ishtar. This is the name of our God. And so by saying the Yud-He-Vav-He name, by saying Adonai is our God, we are making a very particular statement. We are saying all those other named gods out there and all the other pantheons everywhere else, every 2-bit idol, stick, moon, sun, star, that's not our God. Our God is just the one that goes by Yud-He-Vav-He. That's who's our God. And then we wrap it up, as Madison said, with, and that's it. Echad. There's no others. And no others for us, and no others at all. So the first statement is the statement that this is what we will call God. This is who we approach as God. And it's a very singular, specific concept, the Yud-He-Vav-He. That is accepting God as king. That's accepting God as king. It's not accepting God as God. I mean, Adonai, it doesn't say Adonai Malkeinu. It doesn't say God is our king. So how is this accepting God? How is this accepting the kingdom of God? When I've never actually used the word kingdom in the word Shema at all, or in the prayer Shema. It's not in the next paragraph either. You know, hate to tell you. We go on to talk about loving God with all our heart and might and soul, which we're going to get to later. But in the Shema itself, it doesn't mention king, and yet our tradition says this is the line twice a day when we are reconnecting to God as our king, without the word king. Well, because the concept of king for our ancestors, and should be for us, transcends the idea of saying, this is a king. That's not accepting a king. That's describing a king. That is putting a title on a particular person. That is maybe just giving a dictionary definition. Like, for example, when we have our tea party, which we are using the excuse of King Charles' coronation as the reason for getting together and having some nice food and companionship. Are we accepting King Charles III as our king? No. We are not, right? We're not going to be saying, long live the king as though he were our king. What would it mean to accept him as our king? What would it mean to accept anybody as our king? Is it just saying, oh, look, there's Charles III. He's our king. Have I accepted him as my king? Not really.
It would be recognizing that they have power over everything.
Power.
So they're the ruling force on everything.
Power. And ruling. What does that mean? It means I accept this as being something that can command me. I accept this as being my king. When we acknowledge God in the Shema as being our God, when we say Adonai Eloheinu and no one else, we are preparing ourselves then for the next paragraph where we talk about the actual commandments. Because you have to accept the authority of the author before what they wrote has any power over you at all. Otherwise, it's just very interesting. I studied a lot of philosophy when I was an undergrad. I still like reading all sorts of things from antiquity. That doesn't mean I accept Marcus Aurelius as having any authority over me, as having been, the philosopher king of Rome. Doesn't mean I accept Confucius as having any authority over me, as being one of the great philosophers and thinkers and guiders of Chinese civilization. But when I read Torah, I'm not just reading a random collection of work from our antiquity. I'm reading something that I believe has the authority to guide my life. Almost as though I'm accepting it as a yoke. I'm saying, this I will let guide me. Because remember, the yoke is not just about pulling the plow. It is about also a way to transmit direction from the farmer with the reins. Farmer pulls left, cow goes left. Farmer goes right, cow goes right. You have to accept the yoke before you will even feel the tug left and right as the farmer directs. You have to accept Adonai Eloheinu before the mitzvot, as discussed in the middle paragraph, make a difference to you. Otherwise, it's just something somebody said once in a book. But if you accept the fact that this is God, and that God has the authority and the right to command me, then the fact that God tells me to go left or go right will make a difference. That's what it is to accept a king. If you don't accept the king, the commands will not have the same impact. We'll get back to what happens when somebody is commanding without having been accepted, but that's for a later text. Okay, are we good? Questions, comments? Onward. Since a human is a physical being, that is, seduced by the vanities of the world. Remember, vanities is the Old English word meaning the nothingness of the world, the trivialities of the world. It's not just about staring in the mirror. And drawn by his desires, he requires a constant reminder of the kingdom of the heavens to guard him from sin. When a man remembers in the morning the unity of God and his kingdom, Shema, and his providence and omnipotence is over everything, which is the second paragraph of the Shema in particular, and he places to his heart that his eyes are open upon all his ways. God actually cares about us. The farmer is watching and steering, and that all of his steps are marked, that he cannot obscure anything from him, can't hide, and he cannot hide any of his thoughts. Will this thought and acknowledgement of his mouth and the thing not be a protection for him from the whole day? I know, very long, old-style sentences. If you actually accept God's kingdom twice a day through the Shema, the Be'ahavta recitation, you actually think about this, not just as blah, 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 but what does this actually mean? Yes, I accept that this is something that was going to guide me, that this is a yoke that is on me, and thankfully it is there because it turns my life into purposeful action and it guides me left, right as needed. It makes it much easier to go left when you should go left, even when you want to go right. It makes it much easier to plow straight, even when there are a myriad of distractions and temptations that would take you off that course. If you don't think about that, well, it's much harder to walk that straight path. It's much harder to keep going forward, believing that what you're doing is meaningful. And if you don't believe that what you're doing is meaningful, then it doesn't matter whether you do it or not, or do something else that might seem more attractive at that particular moment. So, Sefer HaChinuch is reminding us that this reminder that we have built into our life through Jewish prayer is not just, you got to do it because you got to do it, but you got to do it because this is going to help you do what actually is important and good for you in life. He continues, because the commandment is an obligation of the heart, if he did not have intention in his heart, he did not fulfill his obligation. Taken from the discussion back in the Talmud that we were referencing earlier. The recitation of the Shema, in particular, that first line of the Shema, the 6 words that are most famous to us all, is one of the only times in all of Jewish law where if you didn't mean it when you said it, you don't get credit. And if you don't mean it when you give tzedakah, if you don't really care about poor people, you don't really care that this is just and that God is the one telling you to be just by helping those in need, you still get partial credit for helping them because you did help them. You return a lost object, you're honest in your business. You still get credit for being a decent person, even if in your heart of hearts you wish you could cheat them. You were only doing it because you were afraid of the cops or the IRS. You still get credit for being okay with what you did, even if you didn't mean to or want to. But when it comes to the Shema, if you just say it and you don't think about it, no points. No point. No points, because you didn't mean it. And this is a commandment about how we focus on the world. And if you can't focus for 6 words on the concept that there is this force which is greater than me, which has given me the opportunity to be able to walk in this world with purpose and meaning without stumbling over every possible pitfall, then stop and think before you say it, until you can have that in your mind. Yes?
Is that, this is the one line I noticed stood out to me where it says, will this thought and the acknowledgement of his mouth in the thing not be a protection for him that whole day? So like we're implying that protection aspect in the sense of like you'll be guided or like, is that what you're talking about?
That kind of protection. It's going to keep me from making mistakes.
Right.
But by thinking about there are rules that come from the ruler, and I accept that, I'm going to be better protected from making mistakes. Not perfectly insulated. We all make mistakes. That's why we got Yom Kippur. But it's much better. I'll be much better off than if I refuse to acknowledge or accept that concept.
Or could you think about it as like it's inevitable that we're all going to experience difficult things, but to hope that we'll be given the strength or protected to have the strength to go through the difficult things, and that kind of.
Exactly right. I mean, in the modern world in particular, the "why should I bother" attitude is one of the most pernicious that people face. I mean, we look around and we are now better informed than we've ever been before. And better informed means we're also more skeptical and jaded and exposed to the fact that things don't always work in the world the way we think they should work. That justice is not always done, that the good don't always get rewarded and the bad don't always get punished, or not as much or as fast as we would like them to. And that can make you just say, well, why am I bothering? Why should I even try? Why get up in the morning if the world is like this? But reminding ourselves that whether the world is always positively conforming to the view that God has or not, I still have a role to play. I can still get up and I can still plow my furrow. And I can still plant something that will grow there, strong and good. And yes, together that will eventually affect the rest. But it is that, it strengthens us against any possible challenges that we come across. Doesn't mean we don't still stumble. Doesn't mean it isn't still muddy out there. But without that reminder, then I'm just a cow in a field. And that is one of the worst things that a person can feel. That they are truly just a meaningless animal floating in a vacuum of space. All right, let's finish Sefer HaChinuch. The says is required us to lengthen echad. You may have noticed every time we say the Shema, we always finish with Adonai Echad. And we really hit that dalet at the end. It's like you're in speech therapy, speaking from personal experience, and the person is really telling you, hit the d at the end. Make sure the tongue and the teeth, you smack it. Why? The answer was, until you crown him in the heavens and in the earth and in the 4 directions of the world, meaning to say that you have intention that his governance is over all, and that there is nothing obscured from him, and that the existence of all things is with his will. That's how long you should hold out your echad. Now, yes, you're probably more familiar with the common explanation that we hit that dalet in order to differentiate it from the word acher, which would mean that Adonai is something else, from the word other. Yes, that's also a wonderful teaching within Judaism, not the one that Sefer HaChinuch chooses to bring. He instead says, you're holding that echad because this is your last-minute buffer zone. If you didn't really meet it up until this point, you can still stretch it out until you actually are able to help tip yourself over into accepting God as king in that final breath of the echad. So that extra stretch is not just for emphasis, it is also a little extra thinking time. I will often tell my bar mitzvah students when they are learning trope that you should like the long trope. I know it seems more complicated, but when you're doing a long trope, you're just doing one vowel and doing a bunch of notes on it. You can actually think about what the next one is too, because you're not having to do anything else. The echad is giving us that extra echad, there's that extra time to really make sure that we didn't just go through the first 5 words by rote. We are actually thinking before we finish off. All right, we've got to keep going, or otherwise we're going to run out of time on the camera. You know, have to put another quarter in. Rabbi Eliezer said, if it is said with all your soul from the Ve'ahavta, why is it also said with all your might? And vice versa. If it's said with all your might, why is it also with all your soul? Why does Ve'ahavta have this three-part introduction of you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul? There's different ways of translating those words. It seems redundant. And as always, there's no redundancy in Judaism. There's just more opportunity for discussion. If there is someone who places greater value on his body than on his possessions, for such a one it is said, with all your soul. The soul in the biblical language means your life, not just your eternal soul element. It is your breath, your physical existence. And if there is someone who places greater value on his possessions than on his life, then for such a one it is said, with all your might, for your stuff. Your meldecha was not just your bicep strength, it was the strength of what you have gathered as your possessions. And Rabbi Akiva has a slightly different interpretation, with all your soul, even if he, meaning God, takes your soul. That the Ve'ahavta is asking us to acknowledge God as God and to love God up to and including the moment we die. And that's a hard ask. But that's actually what it means to accept someone as your king. Or, in the case of a democracy like America, to accept our government as legitimate and worth obeying. When someone serves in the military of the US or in any other country where they feel that there is a legitimate ruler, they are saying, if you need me to fight up to the point where I might die, I will. And I'm not going to curse you for putting me in that position. Because this fight, this struggle is worth it. Because I accept you as being the authority that has the right to put me in that position in the first place. Now that's a fairly huge ask, because especially in the modern world of hyper-individualism, we don't like to imagine that anything, let alone anyone, would ever be in a position to ask us to lay down our life. And yet when you think about it, I am sure, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, that most of us here have something or someone that if push came to shove, if it became a choice of me or them or this ideal or institution, yeah, I would be willing to sacrifice myself for them. That's the feeling that Rabbi Akiva is talking about. And in case you think he is just a theorist, that is, of course, exactly what happened to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was one of the rabbis that was involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt. He is one of the ones who stood up against the Roman Empire and lost. And he is one of the 10 rabbis that we commemorate on Yom Kippur during our martyrology as having been tortured to death. And indeed, while he is being flayed alive by steel combs, because the Romans were very inventive in their own way, it is the time for Shema. It is that time of day for the recitation of the Shema. And so he does. He recites the Shema while dying. And his students say, even now? And he's like, of course now. My entire life I have taught that even if God takes your soul, you still accept God as being Melech. So now that I have a chance to actually do it, would I not? And so he does. And we can talk about that more another time. Okay. But we're still sort of tiptoeing around what it means to truly accept God as king. So that's what we're going to be focusing on more for this back page. And we're beginning with Bereshit Rabbah. And I'm sorry if everyone else's copy is as faint as mine. I apologize. I guess my printer's running out of toner. One who was traveling from place to place, and he saw a burning mansion. He said, "Is it possible that this mansion is without someone responsible?" The owner of the mansion looked out at him and said, "I am the master of the mansion." So was our father Abraham saying, "Is it possible that the world is without someone responsible?" God looked out at him and said, "I am the master of the world." So this is one of the many midrashim about how it was that God came to say to Avram at the time, "Lech lecha." Why Abraham? Why did God seem to have this amazing relationship with him out of the blue? Well, it wasn't out of the blue. Instead, this particular midrash is saying it was because Abraham realized something about the world that most other people had gone through feeling oblivious to. Abraham looked at the world, and well, what exactly parallel is being described here? What state was the world in?
Falling apart.
It's falling apart. It's on fire. Those of you young enough to still use social media may know the meme of a picture of a little dog sitting in a burning house, right? That was the rest of the world. Everyone was saying, this is fine, right? Yes, the world is burning, the world's falling apart, but that's what the world is. Of course, random chaos, gods that are no better than us, that just go around doing horrible things to each other and to humanity. Yeah, normal, whatever. Abraham instead went, wait a minute. If there is a world, if it's on fire, who's in charge here? I want to speak to the manager. Right, that's the chutzpah of Abraham. And of course, as you can see, the owner of the mansion leans out and says, woohoo, I'm here. There is an owner, you're right. It's not just a mansion burning in the middle of nowhere. And what role does that put God in then? The owner of the world, who likewise sees the world burning and wants help. Right, the owner in the mansion that's on fire, don't you think he wants the person wandering by to help? So too, by this midrash, in all of its audacity, is saying, God too wants people to help, wants them to notice the fire and realize that fire is not the normal state for the world to be in, and to actually say, well, can't we help put this out? Shouldn't there be something in charge to prevent the fire, to stop the fire? Well, where's the owner? And then God responds. So it is Abraham reaching out first, not God reaching to Abraham first. And this then introduces us to the radical notion that God is king because we accept God as king. Now, that gets me in a lot of trouble when I talk to interfaith groups, because a lot of people want to work with the idea that, of course, God is king. God is king, God was king, God will be king. Boom, done. What are you talking about, Rabbi? How are you saying that God's kingship is somehow dependent upon us? Now, I'm not saying that God's kingdom is dependent upon us in a literal sense. The world will still be here, we'll still be spinning around the sun's still spinning around the Milky Way, etc., etc. God is always going to exist, God has always existed, will always exist, and is beyond anything else that we could ever possibly call a true king. Good. But if a king sits alone in the forest, is it actually a king? If no one accepts the king as king, is it actually a king? In the words of Game of Thrones, if you have to demand that people call you king, you're not a king. Instead, it is for the people to recognize the right of the sovereign in order for that to actually matter for those people. For a king without a population that is willing to accept them is not really what we mean by king, which is where we're going to go in our Kedushat Levi. So he's beginning with part of the words of Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet who tried to curse us and ended up blessing us, taken from Numbers 24. A star emerging from Yaakov has begun its journey, a scepter from Israel. It smashes the corner posts of Moab, the foundation of all the descendants of Shem. The poetic language of Bilam becomes clearer when we look at Psalm 22:29. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules the nations. This will be demonstrated when liberators shall march upon Mount Zion to wreak judgment on Mount Esau, and kingship shall be the Lord's. Taken from the last line of the book of Obadiah. We need to understand the difference between the words ruling, moshel, and reign, melucha, both of which refer to the exercise of authority. The word reign refers to rule by a king whose subjects have submitted to it willingly, whereas the word rule is used in Scripture when the subjects are unwilling, but unable to shake off the rule of the dictator. The Jewish people are described as willingly submitting to God's rule. In the future, as described in Psalms and Obadiah, the situation will change, and the non-Jews will willingly appoint God as their king also. As we say at the end of the Aleinu every single day, in that day shall the Lord be one, and his name one. And indeed, the Elenu is the paradigmatic prayer of extolling God as king for not just us, but eventually for the world. But what does that mean? Does that mean that we will stride across the world with our armies, dominating them and subjecting them to God's kingship? That we will establish the kingdom of God at the end of a sword and a spear? That we will bomb them until they accept God? That's not God. That's not kingdom. Right? That's dominion. That's ruling. But that's not actually king. To be a true king, to have a true reign, means that you are willingly accepted by the people who call you king. Not that they call you king because they're afraid of having their head cut off. They're only calling you king because they're afraid of having your head cut off. Then you may rule that area, but you're no king. And that's not what God wants. God doesn't want us to live in perpetual fear and terror if we deny God's kingship. God wants us to acknowledge God as king because God is trying to give us judgments, rules, guidance for our life that will allow us to thrive. God is the king who wants the kingdom to be good, who wants to serve the kingdom so that they can thrive, who wants the people to turn with acclaim and say, thank you for giving us these laws, for protecting us, for being our king. With you, we know that we are better. That's what we are meant to be aspiring towards, and to recognize that this is a reciprocal acknowledgement. It is not just about us as a dumb cow accepting the yoke of heaven. It is us as being intelligent, choosing human beings, accepting the yoke of heaven willingly and lovingly, because we recognize that it is being offered lovingly and for our benefit. It is not because God has he's power mad. God is not megalomaniacal. God is not just gets a kick out of bossing people around. Flesh and blood kings, sure, they're a dime a dozen that are like that. God is the best of what we want for those that are in a position of authority. Not looking to give rules that will make them better, but looking to give rules that will allow the community, the society, and each individual within it to thrive and be better. We following that idea? Okay, so now we get to a heart-wrenching application of this. This is taken from Eicha Rabbah, and if you're ever feeling too happy, read Eicha Rabbah. Eicha is the Book of Lamentations, and the Midrashim on the Book of Lamentations lament an awful lot. Here is a very, very short excerpt from the end of one of the stories. It may look awfully familiar because it is one that has been retread for Hanukkah as well, which is the story of a mother with 7 kids. And they are brought before the emperor, in this case the emperor of Rome in this midrash, and each of them are told, submit to our gods and you can live, and each one of them refuses to submit and gets murdered in front of their remaining brothers and mother. And now this paragraph we're down to the last brother, the youngest one, who, as you'll see, is very young, although he's also very eloquent. The emperor said to him, your brothers had full days, full lives, and experienced goodness, but you are young. You know, they lived. They weren't little kids. You're a little kid. Bow to the idol, and I will do good things for you. He, meaning the youngest brother, replied, the Lord will reign forever. God will be king forever. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. And it says the Lord is king forever. Nations have been eliminated from his land. And God is going to be king when you're dead and buried. So why would I serve you? Right, that's the chutzpah of Israel. And you will cease, and you will cease, and his enemies will cease. Flesh and blood lives today and dies tomorrow. He's wealthy today and poor tomorrow. Something to say to an emperor that's already killed 6 of your brothers. But the Holy One, blessed be he. He lives and persists forever and for all time. The emperor said to him, see, your brother is slain before you. Look at the bodies, guy. Wake up. I am casting my ring to the ground before the idol. Lift it, so everyone will know that you heeded my voice. So what the king is saying here, the emperor is saying, is look, I'm just going to casually drop my ring. You bend down and pick it up. You're not bowing to the idol. It'll look like it to all the assembled mass, but you won't actually be bowing. You'll just be picking up my ring. So you don't bow to the idol, but I get everyone to think that I made you bow to the idol. Okay? We're all a winner. You don't have to die. That's the deal that the emperor is offering. He, the kid, said to him, It is a shame for you, Emperor, if you fear people who are your equivalent. Well, will I not fear the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, the eternal God? Like, wait a minute. So you want to come up with this ruse to trick the whole group to think that I actually bent to your will and bowed to the idol because you're afraid of the group. Is that what it is to be emperor? To be emperor means to be afraid of the masses? That you're just trying to wiggle out of this because you don't know what the people will do to you if you can't exert your authority over me. Because if you can't break me, some stupid little boy, and then not murder me, because that's another way of exerting authority, then what happens to your rule? And you know it'll come crashing down. Because if people suddenly realize, he's just a guy, flesh and blood and purple robes, but just a guy. Why should I do what he says? Well, because he'll murder you. Okay, that's a good reason. But if you remove that reason, then there's no reason. Why would we listen to a Roman emperor? Why would anyone listen to why would Romans listen to a Roman emperor? He's just a guy, a pretty horrible one at the time. And so this kid is pointing out, God's not like that. God's not just trying to exert power. He's not trying to dominate the world. What kind of person are you? And if I would serve you, that would mean I'd be rejecting God. And no offense, but God's a lot better than you. He said to him, the emperor to him, is there a God in this world? Right, really? You believe in God? Are you sure there's a God? The kid responds, woe are you, emperor. Have you seen a world without a master? Really? You think this whole world exists and there is nothing beyond it? Nothing that created, nothing that guides it, nothing that has like an idea of what is right and what is wrong and what you're doing is wrong? Are you telling me you're only doing what you're doing because you think there's nothing bigger than you? I feel sorry for you. The emperor goes on and murders him because he was Roman and that's what the Romans did. Let's finish on a slightly more personal note, because most of us will never be standing in front of an emperor. From when those who accepted bribes proliferated, the laws became twisted and deeds became corrupted, and there was no comfort in the world. From when those who looked at the faces of the litigants in judgment proliferated, you shall not fear the face of any man, ceased. And they removed the yoke of heaven and placed upon themselves the yoke of flesh and blood. So the end of the book of Sota, of Masechet Sota, the Talmud, details the disintegration of the society in the end of the Second Temple days and the rise of Roman rule. And what they are saying is, what led to removing the yoke of the kingdom of heaven? What actually did that look like at the time? Was it just people stopped saying Shema all the time? What were the symptoms of the yoke being taken off? Corruption. When people accepted bribes. When they said, oh, well, I've got a court case in front of me, and he's powerful. So if I do him a favor, he'll do me a favor when I make a ruling on his side. And, why not? That's removing the yoke. Yes, the Shema is there and all of the other blessings to make us actually yearn towards God, to accept God and to understand God. But ultimately, removing the yoke doesn't just mean I stop saying the Shema. Removing the yoke means I stop living by the rules. I allow myself to be corrupt, to be bribed, to give in to all of the other things. But notice, do you get out of having a yoke? At the end, you're still wearing a yoke. It's just a different yoke. Do you want the yoke of flesh and blood? Meaning, do you want a yoke of some other person, whether it be a Roman emperor, whether it be a local king, whether it be the bully in your office, whether it be, the terrible neighbor in the homeowners association? Do you want one of them to be the yoke? One of them to be pulling the reins and wielding a whip? Do you want to be trying to plow for their benefit? Because that's your option. You either live your life accepting that there is a true king that wants us to thrive and be good and to have meaningful lives that are productive, loving, caring, and wonderful for all, or you accept some substitute which is not going to tick all those boxes. Those are the options. And when we actually say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, We are making an aspiration. We are not just making a description. We are saying we wish that the world would recognize God as the king of the world rather than all of the substitutes that are out there. Because all of those substitutes out there suck. And they're terrible. And we've got thousands of years of history that show how bad it is, not just for us, but for people of all times, all across the world, including them, including the people who had power. Go back and read the Roman history and see how horrible it was to be emperor for most of those centuries. It was no cakewalk. Sure, you had more money and more food and all of that, but you also had a really high probability of being poisoned or stabbed in the back. Most of them did not die of natural causes. We'll leave it at that. Is that really what you want? Is that really how you think the world should be? No, we want the world to be better. We say we want a kingdom of God for the world. The Takeno Lama Mahut Shaddai, for the world to be repaired through the dominion of God. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a holy war or a crusade or a jihad. We're talking about the whole world recognizing that there is a measure of justice that should be in the world, a measure of what is right and wrong. And if we would all just pull in that direction, rather than going for all the substitutes that make life so much worse, well, then we'd have a wonderful place to be. That's what we mean when we say Melech. All right, any final questions, comments?
Why did the Seraphim do this? Why do they accept Malchut Shaddai?
Because they don't have a choice. So when we have the Kedusha, and on the other places within the prayer service or within rabbinic teaching, where we talk about the Seraphim, the angels, or one of the categories of angels, and we talk about them praising God, Kadosh, 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 and we talk about them accepting God's sovereignty. It is actually a metaphor for what we aspire to, because we all know, I'm sure, the final line of the Kaddish, Osei Shalom Bimromav. What is Bimromav?
From on high.
Not from on high, in the heights, in his heights. Osei Shalom Bimromav, the maker of peace in his heights. Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. That is the one who should make peace for us and for all of Israel. We are contrasting. We do not have shalom. Now, what does shalom mean? It doesn't just mean not war. Shalom means perfection, that harmony. The harmony that the world would have if we were all pulling in the same direction. Whereas Bimromav, in the heavens, they all pull in the same direction because they don't have free will. All of the angels do as God bids them, because unlike humans, they don't get to decide yay or nay. So of course there is harmony in the heavens. And of course they acknowledge God as king, which is a symbol of them accepting God's rule, because they don't have a choice, but that means they pull in the same direction. Our ancestors saw this in the clockwork nature of the universe, looking up and saying, look, all of the things other people call gods are predictable stars and planets that don't get to just wander off left because Jupiter wants to. Jupiter always goes where Jupiter's supposed to be. That's harmony, because it's following God's rules. The natural world follows God's laws, whether it be thermodynamics or gravity or electromagnetism and all the other laws we've begun to develop and understand. They do. We don't. So we look to them and say, look at what it could be. It could be this heavenly paradise if only we were like them and pulled the same direction. But we have the harder job because we can choose not to. So we inspire ourselves with their example. We look at the harmony of the world and say, this is what it could be if we too accepted to pull in that direction. And so we lift ourselves up and we get that inspiration, and then we let ourselves back down and we take that inspiration into the world. It's that we are the bridge, as you will, between example and where it needs application. And that's why we talk about the Seraphim and all of the angels being this perfect example of what we aspire to be and what we aspire the world to experience.
So if they give each, and then it says, if they give each other the permission to do this, what does that mean for us?
So when they give each other the permission, it is acknowledging that there is a certain audacity. There is a certain chutzpah, because it's just one of the best Hebrew words, or Yiddish words in that case, for it. That who are we to even think that we deserve to be citizens of God's kingdom? I mean, we're nothing. You know, the difference between me and this plastic cup, I mean, is negligible. And yet, I think I have the right to claim God as my king? Do you think I have the right? That's me asking permission, right? It's each looking to each other and saying, well, yes, I may not be able to grab that right for myself because to do so would be arrogant. But I can tell you, you are godly. You are a citizen of God. And you have the right to praise God as your king. I can tell that to you because that way you're not arrogant. And you can tell it to me, that way I'm not arrogant. And both of us can acknowledge the truth. So it is recognizing the godliness in each other. And recognizing that that is a chorus, a harmony that comes together when we do so. That we need each other to be buttressed in this. And giving that permission to the reshut is a critical metaphor in that process.
So we have to help each other put on the yoke.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to recognize that we're worthy of the yoke in the first place. You know, one of the worst things is that you can feel, again, to go back to the yoke and the cow metaphor, I'm not strong enough. And what would I add? I mean, you know, God doesn't need me. He needs an ox, a giant, you know, someone who is a brilliant person or full of strength, full of passion, the greatest philanthropist, the most brilliant imaginative mind. What am I going to add by putting myself in the yoke? Right? My contribution would be nothing. No, your contribution